What's shaking, cats and kittens? Rob Lee here, and today's episode of The Truth in This Art is sponsored by a new online art platform called Fire and Bliss Creative. Fire and Bliss is the first art platform that I've seen that focuses on the art of the LGBTQ plus BIPOC and allied artists exclusively. And I have to say, the pieces are amazing. Whether you're looking specifically to add diverse art to your collection, or you have a space that needs a bit of updating, every single print on fireandbliss.com has been created by a diverse, independent artist who maintains full control over their art and their profit. I worked with Fire and Bliss to curate a collection of my favorite pieces, like Somewhere Blue by Wodrich Francois. Shop my favorites at fireandbliss.com/truth and get 20% off your first purchase at Fire and Bliss. Again, that's fireandbliss.com/truth and use the code TRUTH for 20% off your first purchase. Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I am chatting with the founder and CEO of Baltimore-based Mason Dixie Foods, maker of clean label, preservative-free, frozen, scratch-made biscuits, scones, and sweet rolls. The goods can be found in more than 5,000 stores across the country, including several major retailers like Whole Foods. Please welcome Ayeshah Abuelhiga. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Rob. Nice to be here.
As you can probably tell, and nice to have you. As you can probably tell, I copied and pasted that from a website. And so with that being said, I always like to invite the guest on to really say their piece, how you describe your work, and that moment that you knew you wanted to risk it for the biscuit. I was really, I was going to do it. So
I love it. Hey, it's that tagline has stuck, so I'm here for it. So, it was an accidental journey to this world. I kind of to back it up a little bit, I started out in the food and beverage industry to put myself through college. My parents were both immigrants, my mom from Korea, my dad from Israel, and they came to Baltimore to start a life.
Yeah. And
they used to own a carryout restaurant up in Charles Village. And when I was really little, I still remember seeing all kinds of people coming in and out of that place, right? It's construction workers, business people, homeless people, everybody's coming in and out of there, right? So, I always thought it was crazy how that little shop was such a unifier. And really when as an adult, when I really thought about why, and I really understood flavor and taste and having an opinion about food, it was because it was down home comfort cooking, right? It was made from scratch by my mom, and it was anything from collard greens to chitlins to, ribs, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't like that stuff? So, it was kind of in my blood, and I never really thought about it because my parents, since day one, typical brown parents, you're going to go to college, you're going to become a lawyer, a doctor, you're going to be successful, you're not going to work hard, as if those jobs aren't hard.
Right.
In their minds, you don't work if you have those jobs. But it wasn't really for me. I am a terrible liar, and I am scared to death of blood. So, they were not career paths for me. I ended up going to college, putting myself through school via scholarships and working in restaurants. I had no living spending money.
Sure.
So I worked 3-4 restaurant jobs at a time, hustled. And it was kind of crazy because I was first to go to college. There wasn't really no one hands you a guide on how to do college, right? And especially if you're a first timer with no older siblings that have done it, or even cousins. None of my family had gone. I didn't know what to expect. So here I am, little blue collar girl, and I grew up in Section 8 housing until I was 13.
Okay.
So being dropped off I went to GW for school, into the middle of Washington, D.C. With no money, and being surrounded by really rich people who kind of figured out college really quickly.
Right.
So it was great to be in restaurants because it was almost like a safe space. It was a refuge because people were speaking 4 different languages. Everyone was from everywhere, not just from DC or whatever. They're from all different walks of life, and they were all hustling for that dollar. And it was really comforting for me to find my people somewhere, right? As I was being launched into this institutional education world. And then, I did launch my career 14 some odd years in tech and automotive, and I climbed really quickly. But I was just really unfulfilled, and I didn't want to sit and wait for that C-suite position to pop up, and be sitting in that desk for 20 years to wait for it, especially being a woman and a woman of color.
Right.
I wasn't going to wait for that. So I decided to step out on my own and the biscuit thing came about just because the Southern food element was what I was really thinking about. I was still in DC, and all around me were all these concepts: Sweetgreen, Kava, Five Guys. They were all coming up, and pizza. I mean, all of these guys. And I was just like, why can't I do that, right? And why are we eating crap fried chicken and biscuits from Popeyes and Chick-fil-A with racists and homophobes and all these things? I'm like, there's got to be something better than this, right? So I set off on this comfort food journey. And then when I was really thinking about how to make it work, Panera was like, still blowing up, and they used to make their bread fresh back when they were still good. And that premise was like why I thought about the biscuits. So I was like, oh man, it took me back to when I was 10 years old, and my sisters asked me to make biscuits, and I made them for the first time out of a recipe I got at the public library. I printed that thing off on the copy machine. Do people even know what a copy machine is anymore?
I hope so.
You would hope, but you never know. So then I remember making the recipe and cutting it with a glass, and my sisters just loved it. And I just remember their smiles. So I was like, there's something about biscuits. And then I was like, man, it's a good vehicle for food. It's a good sandwich maker. It's a good side, and it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, this is going to be it. This is what I'm going to focus on. And I'm not a chef by trade. So I started out on the journey. I found a pastry chef to help me, and I was like, make me this biscuit, but better, right? And don't use any crap ingredients, because everything I'd sampled, like, right, I got a hold of the Cisco catalog and I was ordering, and all the biscuits were crap. They weren't biscuits, right? They are oil wrapped in flour.
No.
And I was just like, this can't be it. And so when it really kind of hit me it was like, okay, I am going to make the world a better place by making biscuits the way they're supposed to be made.
Right.
And that doesn't sound like anything special. But when I launched the concept on Kickstarter, again, this was at a time when celebrity chefs were climbing, like Chopped was like the thing, like everybody was, dabbling in like their food artistry, and all of these like fast casual concepts were really big venture backed, or they were celebrity chef supported.
Sure.
And to make my name kind of sit, or the brand Mason Dixie to sit, I was like, I need to get out on some kind of platform and get some eyes on this. So I launched it on Kickstarter before it was anything. Kickstarter back then was like 1-800-MY-IDEA with the guy with the caveman thing, right? Yeah. You send your invention in and you get money. So I was like, I'm just going to try it. There was one other restaurant on there, and they successfully funded 20 grand or something. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And it wasn't about the money. We got the money, but it was every person, even if they gave $1, sent me a love note that just said, oh my gosh, biscuits. That reminds me of my great-great-grandfather. This is my grandma who used to make. They would send me pictures. They sent me recipes. In fact, when we had the restaurant in DC, the jam recipe was from one of our Kickstarter backers, because she asked that to be her reward for when we opened the restaurant. Yeah. So like, it was deep, right? Like, people were really emotionally connected to the idea of a biscuit. It's not just bread, right? It was something different. And that's when I was like, all right, now I have a duty, like a God-given duty now, because all these people have impressed upon me emotions and memories and thoughts that like are deeper than just, damn, that shit was good, right? Like it was heavy. And then when I really started getting into it, when we started developing the menu and like what we were going to differentiate ourselves about, I was shocked. We tried to buy antibiotic-free chicken back then. This is like 2014. And that actually, there was one farm in all the East Coast that supplied it. Now look at it, right? Like there's these things that now we take for granted that just weren't, like we use cage-free eggs. They were like, you couldn't even find those. We had to go to a farm. Like it was like those types of things were just not as prevalent. And I'm so glad the world's changing in that direction, but it had to start somewhere. Yeah. And, we were part of that change.
That's great. And I think like, I'm going to be asking redundant questions because you gave me the full thing and I appreciate it. And I think it's funny. I'd be remiss if I don't mention this. I feel like a fat POS because I feel like I've had a biscuit every day this year. Like, I mean, we're almost
with that
month 3 and I feel like I've had a biscuit every day. But yeah, it's something that I start off the day with it, right? Like instead of like coffee, I'll have coffee and a biscuit. And
why not?
It's the best way to start things. And
it is.
And I appreciate, your frankness and that you want something that's quality, right? Where I'm a food snob. I'm unabashed food snob. And if I go to a place and they say, oh, we're doing the biscuits and gravy, or we're doing shrimp and grits, I'm like, where's the pork in the shrimp and grits? Oh, there's none? Oh, then that's not shrimp and grits. I side eye it.
Exactly.
And when I see places that do really good biscuits, I'm going to keep buying from them and keep buying because it's like you guys are doing it right and it's not common. So I think it's really, really cool that you touched on that being a thing. Like I want quality in what I'm doing, what I'm attaching my name to. And that's it's a very Baltimore thing too, because as you know, authenticity is a thing for us here. And if you come with that bullshit, we're going to tell you.
Look, that's why we moved our headquarters here because being in DC, the only thing they sell is hot air. And, I was really tired of it, right? Like I was tired of not being around a culture of makers. It's happening in DC now, but it's like no one's from there. So they're not ride or die about it, right? Yeah. So there's no one to celebrate that with, right? Like where here, the second we came back, like I have people from kindergarten reaching out and being like, oh my God, I went to kindergarten with her, right? And it's just like, that's so cool, right? Like I'm here to buy with my toddler friends. Like, there's people that are rooting for you from the sidelines everywhere here, right? Absolutely. And they get so excited and so hyped to see your success that it really feeds the machine. And it also holds everyone here, at headquarters accountable. Yeah. Right. To your community and the people that are backing you every day. And it's exactly that. It's authenticity, is realness. And if it's not, if Baltimore says it's not good, then I'm sweating because that means it's shit. Right. Yeah. Like I gotta fix it.
Yeah. And I think here we do that. We do the question of what high school was it? What high school you go to? It's one of those things because it's like, I know you, and And when I saw, when I went through doing the research, I was like, oh, you're from here? I was like, oh, okay, I definitely have to talk to you now. Because it was kind of one of those things of like, how do I make the connection? Seeing I'm one of those guys that would go to Whole Foods to get my Topo Chico all the time. Yeah. And I was like, what's this Mason-Dixie situation about? We'll see. And realizing it's Baltimore, I was like, oh, okay, great. So thinking back, right? Think back to your childhood a little bit. Describe maybe one or two of those lessons that really stick out from your upbringing that you still apply to business today. Maybe more refined than it was in the onset, but it's like, what is one of those lessons that you've gotten? One or two, rather.
Yeah. So one, my dad was a princess maker. He was cursed, and I think blessed. He thought cursed, but you could see it, two sides of the coin. But he always used to say, oh, I don't have any sons, so all of you guys need to think like boys. And I was like, dangerous thing, Dad, because I will do it. But he said that in that he wanted us to be fearless. He wanted us to never think about being a woman as an adverse thing. And it's a bit strange because my dad was Palestinian Israeli, so he was Arab, and you don't really typically hear like things like that out of Arab men. But he said, you need to hold your ground. If someone fights you, you punch him back 10 times harder. He was like, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do anything that you think you really can do. And if people don't like it, you can tell them to shove it up their ass. Right. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So literally, I remember when I was I think I was in second grade. And, back then, this was in the early 90s. And even though we were in Section 8 housing, it was right on the cusp of the county. So we did end up going to a county school. Okay. But me and my sisters and maybe two other girls were the only people of color in that entire school. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget some teacher of my second or first grade teacher. I think he had low expectations for me because I wasn't white, and she just thought I wasn't going to be able to read and write as well. And we had this activity where we had to do a book. And we had to make our own book with the cardboard and everything. And I did a whole series on a caterpillar going through metamorphosis. And she was floored, right? So she was going around telling all these people oh my God, look at this little girl doing all these crazy things. That's amazing, right? And she took me to who would be my fifth grade teacher, one of the best mentors I ever had in my life, Mrs. Love. And Mrs. Love said, what the hell are you doing with this poor baby girl, taking her around like she's a piece of meat? And she was like, baby girl, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to do it, okay? And so she was like, you just tell her you don't want to do it. I was like, you're right. And you can shove it up your ass.
That's great.
They were just like, what the hell? So it was just one of those moments where I was very confident very early about if I knew I was doing something right, I wasn't going to let anyone tell me that it was wrong. And I think to this day, that's been a principle that I abide by both in business and personally, right? Especially in trying times like these. Like, you got to stand your ground as hard as it can be sometimes. Got to tell people shove it up their ass. But that's lesson one.
That's on the autobiography. It's just on the jacket. I dig it.
Exactly. And then I'd say I learned really early on from both my parents, actually, the value of knowing what you eat, right? Because like, even when we were little and we didn't have any money, we would still go to the farmers markets and buy the bruised produce, right? Like, and my mom would can things. Like, she was actually really masterly skilled in a lot of these things. And so they always used to say, like, when we went to the regular grocery store, like if we went to a Giant or whatever, they would always point to the produce section and say, we're never buying produce here. Those are for the donkeys, right? Because the cucumbers were like that big, right? And the eggplants were like this big. And they were like, they're not supposed to be like that. That's the trash. And you shouldn't eat it because something's wrong with it, right? And that has always stuck with me. Like, to this day, I will not buy produce anywhere that is not organic, natural, or at a farm stand, because I want to know where it's coming from. That's the most directly correlatable thing to something touching earth, soil into your mouth, right? Yeah. And so for I think that's really influenced too, like, why this business means so much to me, because I feel blessed that I had that lesson. But in growing up in Section 8 housing, there were tons of other kids, white, Black, Latino, whatever, latchkey kids just like myself, but who didn't have parents. They were part of the system already. So they didn't have parents that told them the importance of what to shop for and not to eat out of a vending machine, and that pizza isn't the best meal every meal of the day. Like, they didn't get those quality lessons. And then, looking back, now that we're back in B-More, and I do see some of the folks that I grew up with in first grade, they're still in the system. And when I think about it, it's because of you are what you eat, and they didn't get those valuable lessons. So part of this is like, it's a lot to force communities to take up a new standard of what health is, and like to eat healthier and natural and all that stuff. So that's why I also think for Mason-Dixie, it's so important that we push eating better still by eating the foods that you are naturally going to eat, right? Like, you don't need to have a DiGiorno pizza when you could have a Roberta's pizza, or you could have Eat Pizza, right? Like, where the labels are cleaner, right? And that's where, for us, the premise is always familiar food done right.
That's legit. That's super legit. I think it gets missed, and I try to have these conversations with people on, hey, you can do this differently. Nah, this is the way I've always done it. It's like, that doesn't mean it was right. And there are things that are rolled over all the time. And 'cause I come from a data background, and sometimes you put in bad stuff and you just roll it over and you just continue doing it. It's like, why am I always sick? Because you're eating garbage.
Correct.
So I've read that diversity and uniqueness is not only baked into the food, but the business as well. Why is it important to have diverse voices within the business?
Well, if you look at the fabric of America, it's increasingly less white, right? So if you really want to understand, amen, right? But if you really want to understand your customer, your consumer, then you got to act like them. And that's an area where it's been totally remiss by big companies, right? They continue to market to the 1950s census data, and they continue to and there's studies that show it, they over-index marketing to white families because they're still operating on this old thought that America is still a very colonialized white society, when in reality, the Latino and African American population is growing at such a rapid rate, and they're so disconnected from that market base that they're actually, I think in grocery, there's a stat that got put out that it's about a missed opportunity that's totaled $17 billion.
Wow.
For that incremental piece that they're not marketing to. So, and it's not about business for me either. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you want to be around people that get you and that you're comfortable around, right? So you could be yourself, and you could be 100% of yourself without putting up a facade or code switching or doing whatever people don't understand how much time people of color have to waste in their day to reformat who they are and how they need to speak and what they're so concerned about, or not even in their business day, in their personal lives, right? Like the number of Black women that feel the need to perm their hair straight to go to work, right? The number of Asians that want to look and act more white so they are accepted into white culture versus others. This is a systemic issue that can't be fixed by more white leadership and more white thought leadership on what culture and how culture occurs. Culture only occurs if it's practicable every day.
I agree.
And for us, myself, I mean, my business partner is white, but he is a gay male. And that's also a whole different can of worms, right? And even though I look Asian, I don't really think I am 100% Asian every day. I really think of myself as American. And I have friends of every color and every background. And I just always want to be around that vibe. I always joke to people, it's the difference between being on a metro bus and a school bus. On the metro bus, you sit around a bunch of people, all different face colors, everything. But you don't talk to them. You're just on the same damn bus, right? Yeah. That is how big corporate America treats diversity. Then you go on the Mason-Dixie school bus, and it's everybody knows each other. Like, hey, it's a party on the bus. You want a snack out of my backpack, right? It's a different vibe, and the bus looks the same on the inside, but it's vibrant. Mm-hmm. It operates differently. The people are happier. That is what happens when you do culture right. So for us, it's been a really big part of our identities and fabric to make sure that this environment replicates the society we want to be a part of, right?
Totally. I like, I have that one observation. I've joked about it a few times, but I have this thing of I don't talk to white people before 9 or after 5. Just, it's like I've done enough during the day. What more do you want from me? It's like, yo, right. I just want to get into backwards hat mode and I just want to turn into a gimmick for the rest of the day.
And that's the thing. Like, that's where that's the sentiment that people don't realize is exhausting. And I'm not saying that white people are intentionally doing it, right? There's plenty of great people. They don't know that this is the feeling that we have. And it is hard because most people of color don't actually realize they have this feeling until they realize how exhausted they are.
Yeah, and it's the way that the structure and the system is put to kind of perpetuate that. It's a continuance of that, like going back to the point you were making about the census data showing like, you're still marketing towards the 1950s and things like that. Office culture is very much the same way. And then when you see certain elements that, hey guys, we'll throw you guys a bone. Hey, AAPI, it's like, I don't think anyone's using that. Or, hey, Juneteenth, like you guys wanted, like, we're talking about reparations. Here's Juneteenth.
Right.
We're wearing a daishiki when we're doing it. It's like, no one asked for that. Like, no one ordered it. It's like,
that's exactly. It's
comedy.
It is, but it's so contrived too. Because you're just like, have you just thought about listening actively?
Yeah.
Just saying, like, that's a good start. Because the second you can commiserate for real is the moment that these conversations don't need to happen anymore. And we're still not at that point. There's still not a place where white people can really accept that to be an ally, they really need to just shut up for a second.
This is true.
Right? And just listen and feel it as a human being. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the only, and it's crazy because obviously it's not just brown here. I mean, we got white folks here too, but it's like, they've, if you ask any of them, they'll always tell you that culture is first because they've never felt white, right? Like but maybe they feel it now, but they don't feel like it's a challenge for them to integrate, right? They feel like everybody gets us. We're all equal here. Mm-hmm. And it does happen. That's the whole goal of doing DEI correctly.
Yeah.
Is that then you break through these barriers of having to explain yourself and your identity all the fucking time. Mm-hmm. And it can only happen when you have truly assimilated culture and values and people can feel 100% themselves. And that, it's not easy. It really takes a top-down leadership approach to implementing. And Absolutely. That's what people don't want to hear. So they don't want to hear that pensioner that's coming up in the ranks needs to be, and yes. That's the truth.
So what do you think and I think you touched on it actually, what do you think and this is off the script now because I'm like, I got my dander up now. In terms of extending, like in that office culture, right, in that organizational culture, what do you look at as ways to really, I guess, not incentivize, but I guess like compensate might be the term or what have you, that's outside of like, here's some money, thanks for a good job or what have you. But what are those ways? Because you have people who will say like, no, I like to like amplify people. Here's people in these sorts of roles, things of that nature. What does Mason-Dixie do?
So first and foremost, we don't always recruit just based on history, but more on potential, proven attitude, proven performance, right? Like in general. It doesn't have to be scripted to that job, because that's another problem that happens is like, okay, there's not enough brown people who have been a senior executive yet. So like, if you're only looking for brown senior, you're going to get 4, and those 4 people will only get the opportunities, which defeats the whole damn purpose of inclusion, right? So for us, it's always about like, are they a great culture fit? Do they have the chutzpah to get through it, right? Are they provenly dynamic people, right? And then that basis begins with also letting them know, and it's crazy because I actually have this conversation more with women than I do men, but I literally tell all the candidates, especially the ones I want, I was like, if you're coming here, ask for what you're worth.
Yeah. Don't
just tell me what you made. And because I wanted that when I went up my career path. I didn't get that opportunity to be asked that, but you know, I feel blessed that we're in a position that we can do that. So I want to know that you feel happy enough quitting wherever you were and taking the risk to come to a startup, high energy environment, but feel like they heard you and that you are putting your money's worth into it too. Right. And so definitely compensation. Like we don't do it according to stats. We do it according to what that person thinks they're worth. One. Yeah. We promote internally every time we can. Most of our executive suite is actually women, and slowly but surely increasingly women of color, which is really exciting. Yeah. And then beyond just like compensation from a culture building standpoint, right? Like we find reasons to celebrate every week, if not every other week, right? And not just birthdays, right? Like we are grown adults, but we love to decorate this place like a kindergarten, right? Like, it just brings joy, right? Like people like see the hearts for Valentine's Day and the stupid St. Patty's Day things. And like people just, they love it. And then we also find other reasons to celebrate. Like the other day we had our biggest sales month ever, right? So we just pop bottles in the middle of the day and had a cheese board out. Like, why not? Right. So like, those are things that help people just realize like, this isn't just a job. Like these are individual successes that must be celebrated. And all of them are the reason that we have these celebrations, because they're the ones that got us there. Right. Mm-hmm. I also really like to amplify when my people have done amazing things. Like I go to LinkedIn and I will shout the hell out of them. They're so embarrassed. I'm like a mom. They're like, why do you keep telling people that? And I'm like, because you are amazing. Because we have to get better at talking about ourselves. Yeah. And if you're not going to do it, I will. So
it's big. And when, you're supposed to treat yourself well, and when other people are treating you well, especially in a place that ostensibly you're spending a third of your day at, right? And, you should feel good to come to work. And yeah, I will say, working in higher ed, that's where the day job is at. And I'm new into leadership, right? But I recognize I'm, one of maybe 2 Black guys in leadership in this institution, and I'm considerably younger than the other one. So that's a piece of it, right? And yeah. I just remember just chiming in with my background of being in a Spanish-speaking call center, and it was a party all the time. And I was just like, yo, let's get it, let's do it, and just high energy because it was a sales environment. Yeah. And, I would throw in, I was like, we've had shifts in the number of people we're here. We've had people leave. We're into season 3 of COVID. I was like, can we start doing some of these cool things that we've lost just to kind of inspire goodwill and so on? And I was like, you guys have the money because you haven't done it the last 3 years.
That's right.
So how can we do that it's going to be a gain in productivity? I can, if that's the way you want to look at it, right? But it's like, make people feel good about coming into the office.
You have to, right? People need a distraction too. Distractions are part of the workday. If you think about it, like when you were working in those mundane desk jobs a long time ago, when you were first starting out, right? You left this college environment or high school environment where you still had physical education and like activity. Yeah. And then you're told to sit at a desk for 8 hours. You're on Amazon, you're like Googling like why zebras have stripes. Like you're just like, you're not doing work. Where if you're having a good time with, your work family, your culture family, and you're vibing and making jokes and like vibing with them, you're creating a relationship that's going to make you better communicators with each other. You're going to have each other's backs. You're going to work harder to make each other better. And that is effective use of time versus Googling about zebras, right? Like people think, oh, if you're not sitting at your desk, you're not being productive. And it's like, well, that's not true. I could also bang out a shit ton more work in 30 minutes than most of my colleagues back in, corporate America could in 3 hours. So should I be penalized because I am a faster, more efficient worker?
Yeah.
Right. So that's why, we also don't really believe in that. I'm like, you should be as productive as your projects need you to be.
Yeah.
And as much as the company needs you to be. Outside of that, like, micromanagement is so dead. I don't understand that.
Yeah, like I've been really like diving into these things around efficiency and these things around just kind of shifting that paradigm of what we were taught. Like I went to business school, Morgan State, whoop whoop, and you hear all of these different things on this is how you go about it. And then for me, I immediately knew that this doesn't fit. This doesn't work. These ideas don't work. And there was just things I would buck against. You find out the rules and then you start breaking them. So I asked you this, what's a popular piece of entrepreneurial advice that you just like disagree with, that you're like, you hear it all the time, you're like, nah, that's not right?
I don't really hear it as much as people do it. And a lot of people think that there's a formula for success. They always say that they don't think that, but they actually do, right? Because then they'll start referencing shit that they read in the Harvard Business Journal, this thing they saw on CNN, those companies that they were impressed by on Shark Tank. They constantly seek a rubric for success. And it's debilitating because true entrepreneurs, right? If you ask Steve Jobs when he was in his garage, if you ask Bill Gates when he was tinkering with a piece of plastic and a switchboard, like if you ask those dudes what formula they were following, I'll tell you that they're not going to have one, right? Like you have to have, just like art, you have to have freedom of expression in business too. You've got to be free to do things, make mistakes, pivot, solution. You've got to be able to break away from thinking, well, you know what? General Mills wasn't at this point when I was here. Oh gosh, I must be doing this wrong. Like, and you would not believe how many people get to that point and they quit. Like, I'm in the consumer products world, right? And there's so many brands that start and they have these products and they get to like 10 million bucks in sales and they just can't do it anymore because they were chasing some rubric of, first you go to Whole Foods, then you go into conventional, and then you go into, and they're following this thing and, and you should always raise capital from venture capitalists. And then they do everything they think they're supposed to do to the point where they've burnt out all their options. Yeah. And it's like, didn't y'all go to business school? Like, isn't business school like 101? Like, when you run a business, you want to be profitable, you want to be healthy, cash flow, all the little principles. And it's like, those go out the window because vitamin water sold and they weren't profitable.
Right.
Okay. Well, when you can get 50 Cent to rep you at the height of his career, we could talk about vitamin water's model, right? Like, there's just so many things like that where I'm like, you need to what is it? You need to dance to the beat of your own drum, right? Like, you really need to figure out, like, what is your process? How is that sustainable? And how are you going to get there on your own accord? Like, screw everybody else's formulas and, how this is how it's done. If that's the case, then none of us would be here. Millennials, Gen Z, we'd all be, toast.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, as I was, telling you before we got started, how long I've been doing this, I hear so many different things. You need to scale. You need to do this. Your podcast shouldn't be more than this. And I was like, look, here's the thing. and I try not to go left because you mentioned the whole beat of your own drum. I'm an Aquarius. This is what I do all the time. And he's trash, right? But Joe Rogan does a podcast every day that's like 3 hours. So it's like this notion of a 20-minute podcast. And if that's looked at as the reference point of quote unquote success, then how does that work when you're telling me to do a 20-minute one, or you need to change your branding? You need to do this. You need to have your face on there more because you're more relatable as a black man. No, I know what works for what I'm doing. And, the key thing is if I got on here and I came to you like, hey, how's it going? You're like, I got nothing to say to you. This interview is over. And it's like, where's the authenticity? Where's the real conversation? And ultimately, what people will say is, this feels like a conversation versus you got some standard things you're going to ask. So tell me about business, It's like... Exactly. So I got 2 more questions before I get to these rapid fire questions. And all of the goodwill that I've earned during this podcast, it's all going to go away when I get to those rapid fire questions. You're going to somehow hate me and like, oh, get this out of here, this jerk. So I want to learn this real quick. Walk me through that process of developing new products. Like, I see options out there. I was like, look, I need to get like a box scent stat. So tell me the process. Walk me through that process of new products.
So for us, the restaurant was a lot of inspiration, right? Like our first products were always the ones that sold the best. So the biscuits came from that ideation. The sandwiches have come from that ideation. But on the flex, there's sometimes inspiration that comes from blocking, right? Like there was a brand that was trying to come up and take slots doing scones. And I was like, hold up, we can do scones better. We're going to do that. And then there was, and then I heard Cinnabon was pulling out of distribution of their cinnamon rolls. And I was like, hold up, we got to get in there. So there's times where you're like blocking, tackling. There's times where you're just conquering. If there's an empty space, you take it. And there's times where you're really referencing nostalgia and what sells, right?
Yeah.
So it starts there. And then what we end up doing is we do it the way that it's supposed to be done, right? So we start with our expert pastry chef. She makes products from scratch, artisanally, with the finest ingredients. And then we go, how much does that cost? And we're like, holy shit, that's too expensive. So then we try to figure out how to get it down, right? And it's like tweaking sometimes it's just down to brands too, right? Like the types of ingredients that we're putting in. Maybe there is one that's just as good at an industrial sized, it's whatever.
Sure.
So we kind of tweak and tweak and tweak. And then when we work with our manufacturing partners, the bakeries test it on the line. In fact, our pastry chef, Lauren, is at a site right now qualifying some scones. And basically, we have to break their process to make our stuff, because that's the worst part about the food industry today. Is it's so optimized for manufacturing that it's not optimized for humans anymore. And I mean, we've broken butter cutters. We've broken so much machinery to make what we do because we want it to look like how Lauren made it, right? Yeah. Like we want it to look like you made it, right? Which means that nothing's perfect and things are ugly, and that's how we like it, right?
I like that. Last real question I have. I read that your partnership with Ross happened while breakdancing. Tell me more about this, and do you conduct all of your business on the dance floor? Because I feel like this might be a thing.
I could. It was funny because at the time, he and I worked in the same commercial kitchen. So he had a business. It was called, ironically, we always say if anything goes down and we have to like start all over again, we're going to use his trademark name. And it was Cajun Meets Asian. He's actually from Louisiana. So it's kind of hilarious.
That's great.
So he had a nut. It was like a spiced praline company. And so he used to do his nuts out of the place, and we would do the biscuits and everything. And then one day I stopped seeing him, and then I saw him again on the street because he was freelancing as a writer too. And I was like, so what's going on? He was like, oh, I had to quit the business because I became allergic to nuts. So he couldn't do his business anymore. And I was like, oh, well, you want to come work for me? And he was just like, well, sure. And I was like, well, why don't you come to my 30th birthday party? We could talk about it there. And he was like, okay, great. So he shows up, and like all of a sudden he and one of my best friends, Cheryl, are twerking, and he's doing the worm under her on the dance floor. And I was just like, that is exactly the type of energy that I want in my life every single day. Because, business is hard. Entrepreneurship is hard. Yep. And so many times people think they have to do it alone. But the sacrifice of that is someone to bounce ideas off. And it can't always be your spouse or your partner, right? It needs to be somebody who's in it with you. And it's hard to do that if they're just an employee. It really does mean that sometimes a partner is the best thing. And he's been an incredible partner ever since. So I think I will add to the list breakdancing as a requirement on executive recruitment.
Noted. I will be applying soon and getting my knees together. All right. So I got 4 rapid fire questions for you. Okay. And you know how these go. So actually, no, it's just 3. One of them I already asked. Okay. So what is your favorite beverage?
Ooh, black coffee.
You get it. See, you get it. You should go to Sophomore and get the Rob Lee. It's my brand of coffee there at Sophomore.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah. The owner will be feeling really trolled. I'm on the menu now. We trolled him. We put me on the menu. My drink is there. And he's like,
I'm here for it.
He's like, the fuck is this shit? It's like, oh, it's the Rob Lee. Don't forget to get it.
I love it.
Okay, window seat or aisle seat?
Aisle.
How do you start your day? What's the first thing that you do when you get up?
First thing that I do,
other than say fuck, like shit.
I wish. No, I'm thinking first. It really differs every day. I think on weekdays I check my phone and my emails, even though I put it on do not disturb on purpose. But if I'm doing it right, if I'm doing my day right, I wake up and I do absolutely nothing, because what I try to do, and it's funny because I I heard that the CEO of Spotify does this too. And then I also heard that Bezos does this, which I thought was crazy. I just thought I was always a weirdo and not a morning person because I really don't like talking to people first thing in the morning. But, you know, when you're an entrepreneur and you're a CEO, like it never stops. And so even into late nights, like I like working super late because no one's talking to me and I can focus. So same thing in the morning. I don't really like starting my day with chatter before 10 a.m. So I preserve that early morning between 7 and 10 to do my own thing. I walk my dogs. I don't talk to anybody. I'll clean. I'll do random things in the house. Like I might read emails, but I literally won't respond to them because I think it's really important to give yourself some time to do nothing and have quiet in the day. Some people like in the middle and, you know, like I've heard a lot of like CEOs like to do it at the end of the day. But for me, I think it's more energizing to do it first thing, to give yourself the benefit of enjoying waking up.
I agree with that. That's great. And thank you for sharing everything. That's all the questions I have. I want to invite you. One, thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you.
And two, I want to invite you to plug anything that you want to plug. This has been great. And thank you for being so frank about everything. This is refreshing.
Hey, authenticity and realness, right? That's what Be More does. So, no, I mean, hey, if anyone is interested in learning about where to buy us and where to find us, go to our website, masondixiefoods.com, or follow us on Instagram at masondixiefoods. Read up on us. We're here. We're doing it. Support.
Absolutely. So for Ayeshah Abuelhiga, I am Rob Lee saying that there's food in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.